I would say the field of neurofeedback is mostly about suffering and sort of therapy and treatment. So then in this environment, I'm seeing in like 2-3 months, test scores start to skyrocket on executive function testing, and OCD drop away in people that have intrusive thoughts or behaviors, and seizures drop. And I'm starting to really, wait a minute, this doesn't make a lot of sense. This isn't what I know is possible.
Hello and welcome to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I'm Will Polston. This is episode number 151, and in this episode I'm joined by Dr. Andrew Hill. Dr. Andrew Hill is the founder of Peak Brain Institute and a leading neurofeedback practitioner and biohacking coach for clients worldwide. He has lectured on psychology and neuroscience at UCLA's Department of Psychology, where he received a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. At Peak Brain, Dr. Hill provides individualized training programs to help you optimize your brain across goals of sleep, stress, attention, brain fog, creativity, and athletic performance. He is the host of the Head First podcast and continues to do research on attention and cognitive performance. Andrew is one of the top performance coaches in the US and has featured on a number of A-list podcasts, including the Joe Rogan Experience and Dr. Drew. And today he's on the Make It Happen podcast with Will Polston, and we're going to be talking about using neurofeedback to optimize your brain health. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Will. Nice to be here.
Great to be having our conversation across the pond. So you're over, I believe, in LA at the moment?
That's right. Yeah. Far, far away, just about as far as we can get, it looks like, from you guys in the UK.
Oh, good. So now really looking forward to our conversation and getting stuck into things. So we've just heard some incredible achievements and things that you've done, and we're going to get into, it's going to be a fascinating conversation about what it is you do. And I know there's going to be some really practical takeaways for people. But what I would love to know is that in today's day and age, cognitive neuroscience is very much up and coming. There's lots of people talking about it with the help of social media and certain key people that are very focused now on sharing the wisdom of what's possible with our brains and affecting performance, and biohacking becoming more and more common. That's great. But you've been doing this for a long time. You've got a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. What drove you to do that? I mean, was that just a dream since you're a kid, or where did that come from?
Not really. Yeah. Don't do a PhD just because it's it has to have like both intrinsic and extrinsic drive to get you through a program like that. At least in the US, they're long. The average length is 6, 7, 8 years. The European model is a lot better, where you get funded for a 3 to 4 year project, and that's your PhD. I should have gone to Europe for my PhD. Would have been a little bit less brutal. But no, I went back to grad school after about 10 or 11 years after undergrad, and mostly because I was working in environments with autistic and ADHD kids primarily. And this was after working in acute psychiatric and mental health and developmental psych and all kinds of environments for that previous decade, and really working at the edge case, if you will, of human suffering, between everything from people that had multiple disabilities, no language, no vision, no hearing, and everything was tactile sign, and cognitive disabilities as well, all the way through to people with dual diagnoses of substance and mental health difficulties, through child psychiatric stuff, through geriatric psychiatry, and was really seeing a lot of extreme stuff, working in really kind of brutal environments, where people had to be managed, and got injured in that environment and couldn't keep working in this sort of psychiatric hospital, dense environment, and left that field for a while and went into high tech and did some tech work for a while, some database work and tech evangelism. And this is before 2000. So the tech bubble corrected around 2000, and I was kind of bored and left tech and went back into human services just because I wanted to work with kids again, and got a job at an autism center. And I sort of knew they did this thing called neurofeedback, but I wasn't exactly sure deeply what it was, just that it was sort of brain training. And again, this is 5 years ago or something that we're talking. So pretty early for me anyways in the field. And I got into that environment and started seeing people change. Started seeing kids develop executive function in a few months, started seeing eye contact and sensory things shift in autistic spectrum kids, saw seizures drop away left and right, and was really, really impressed with what I was seeing, especially against the backdrop of the previous decade, kind of working in these holding environments where we were being at best palliative. And more often it was revolving door stuff where, a teen would get checked into a psych hospital because of really extreme behavior for 5, 6, 10 days and get stabilized and then get kicked back out into an unstable home, crime, et cetera, environment and present again at the hospital, 3 months later. And it was just this revolving door. Or when we had people that were really acute, we didn't have treatments. We didn't have ways of helping somebody shift. I mean, I ran a group home for 3 years that had 4 people in it, all who had multiple cognitive and physical disabilities. And I spent a year teaching a guy to use a fork. That was my big accomplishment one year was I got this guy, Edwin, to use a fork. Woo, and it was very much a win for him. And he could be sort of out in the world and interact more perhaps. And, it was a win for him, but it was a big push behaviorally, so to speak, just to get him to master this skill. And my experience of mental health was and psychiatry and development was that we just didn't have tools and didn't understand what was going on. And I spent a lot of time with individuals who were not working with their regular developmental plan or without deep suffering or deep deficit, and sort of just looking into the abyss, so to speak, of how humans can fall apart and not seeing that we were doing an awful lot. In inpatient psychiatric, it was medication. Outpatient, it was managed behavior, and it just kind of didn't do much more. So then in this environment, I'm seeing in like 2-3 months, test scores start to skyrocket on executive function testing, and OCD drop away, and people that have intrusive thoughts or behaviors, and seizures drop. And I'm starting to really, wait a minute, this doesn't make a lot of sense. This isn't what I know is possible, but it's happening. It's happening most of the time. What's going on? This is sort of a different landscape. So at the time of in the field of neurofeedback, again, 20, 25 years ago, there was 3 or 4 different schools of thought that were all a little bit in opposition. A lot of conflict going on, a lot of vitriolic infighting on news groups. This is before we had even bulletin boards and things in the web. So it's early web days, and people are flaming each other back and forth in these long news group threads, arguing about how this stuff works. And they all had different ideas and were arguing with really irreconcilable principles about what was going on and what they were seeing. And the 2 or 3 big schools of thought, maybe 3 or 4 at the time, did not agree about mechanism, about approach, about how it happened, why you did certain things. And yet they all got better effects than traditional medicine for the things they worked on. All of them did, full stop. And
just quickly, sorry to interrupt. So just quickly, for the people that are listening that would have no idea about what some of these things would be, what are, like, practically speaking, what is it that was being done that was getting these results in 3 months?
So neurofeedback is a process of training the brain, and most of it is done in a passive biofeedback way. So you measure the brain in real time, stick some ear clips on, and let me give you a practical example that people might be a little more familiar with. So we have circuits in the brain who have certain dedicated jobs or help you orient certain aspects of your stress response, your attention, your sleep regulation, stuff like that. There's a big circuit in the back midline called the posterior cingulate. Kind of acts like a lifeguard. Oh, watch the road, heads up, heads up. It helps you orient to the outside world and redirect your attention in ways that are necessary. We all use it all the time, just to sort of navigate the press of the environment. When we learn the world's not especially safe or predictable, this area kind of cramps up in high gear, and the lifeguard starts scanning the indoor pool for sharks, and it's hard to relax. And so if somebody wanted to work on a rumination or threat sensitivity or trauma response, that posterior cingulate becomes a good target. And you actually, on imaging, can see often that it's overactivated and say, oh, are you a little bit ruminating? Are you threat sensitive? Oh, you are. Okay. But you can explore this and give people agency. But then the important part may be you can change it. So you would stick a wire on the scalp back there and a couple ear clips on, and just measure the beta waves moment to moment that the brain is making, which is that activated tone, and also measure the alpha waves, which is that neutral between the gears that the tissue will briefly go into, and watch the brain make those waves on its own back there moment to moment. And whenever the brain briefly moves in the right direction, the alpha comes up, the beta goes down. The computer sees that and goes, oh, good job, brain, and makes a little game on the screen start to run or run better, or more music happen. And a couple seconds later, the brain moves in the wrong direction. Let's say for that workout, the beta surges again and the game slows down or stops. And the brain says, oh, I don't like no stuff. Where's my stuff? I like stuff. A couple seconds later, it happens to move in the right direction and the game resumes. The big trick here is that we move the goalposts. Every few seconds, we adjust the computer right next to where the brain is. So the fluctuations that are in the desired direction to applaud or reinforce are always right next to where you are. So you're sort of chasing adaptively what the brain is doing and going, yeah, more of that. There you go. There you go. And it takes about 2 or 3 sessions to feel. People do feel it sometimes the first time, but more usually the second, third time, maybe fourth time. After the half an hour of training, you're sort of saying, hey, wait a minute. I might be feeling a tiny bit different. Nah, I'm imagining it. Nah. Well, maybe. Nah. And then the next time it's a little stronger and you go, oh, wait a minute. I think I'm feeling this. And then you have this opportunity like personal training where you work out, you feel the shift afterwards, you evaluate how it feels, and you get a little subtle shift and you adjust the workout and you build it up over time. And by doing that, you can train the regulatory features of the brain. Not everything trains super well, but there's a bunch of stuff does that we care about, including attention stuff, all the executive function features, all the anxiety and stress features, sleep, sensory stuff like sensory processing and sensory integration, social processing, creativity, your immune function, your speed of processing, brain fog, seizures, migraines, all train pretty reliably where you can get a handle on the phenomena of the physiology, start to shape it. And about 2-3 sessions after you start, the brain goes, oh, okay, and starts to move and you feel that. So you start, grading what you're noticing and having this feedback loop with your trainer, your provider, who can help you gradually steer resources you're feeling subjectively in a certain direction. And we always do brain mapping or assessment at the beginning and executive function testing, and then repeat that every other month, every 20-25 sessions. And a couple rounds of those 20-25 sessions will usually create on a bell curve for things like ADHD, metrics of performance or post-concussion or post-COVID, brain fog stuff where your attention is shot. You get about 2 standard deviations in a bell curve in 3 months of stable change because you're always practicing these resources. So once you move them enough, that's how they are. And you're getting a reinforcement naturally because you're always using your attention, your sleep, your stress management. Yeah. So for these big things, you can shape resources. And if you were ruminating, you could shape that posterior cingulate, feel it shift and go, oh, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, I did feel a little calmer. Let's do more of that. And the big thing here is it's not really about the change you're making or about the cool technology or the magical science. It's really more about that you have this opportunity to explore your own physiology and your own performance, reach in and start changing it and feel it change. So it's very direct validation. It's closer to, again, like a personal training or an arc of coaching than it is like a particular medication you might apply for a problem. So the neurofeedback or biofeedback on brain waves or blood flow, you can do neurofeedback on blood flow for migraines and other things. These become a tool you can use to shape your resources, shape your activity. And this is what I saw happening. I was blown away by what was actually happening that I didn't think was possible. And it sent me back to grad school to figure out how it worked.
Wow. So if there's so many questions that come up just hearing you say that, but the first one for me was with my very, very basic understanding, when you were saying about sort of the sensitivity and that particular part of the brain, sort of in basic terms, I always thought that a huge component of it was whether people are kind of in their sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. But you're saying that it maybe isn't, maybe isn't that, but there's a component of the brain that specifically you can do the testing on. So what I was thinking as you were saying that was, if we take something that I know that a lot of people listening to this are either affected by it or have family members or whatnot that are affected by, which are the 3 main things. So I'm thinking sort of autism, ADHD, and let's say OCD, for example. So what were you seeing were the most common things that people were going through when it came to those 3 things specifically? Was there a common theme for people with ADHD? Was there a common theme with autism that then meant that people could sort of make those changes?
Yeah. I do work on brains and I work on resources, and I have a PhD, but I'm not really your doctor. I'm a lot
Mm,
closer to your scientist and your coach. And my joke here is that doctors are great, but they have to be right. You go to
mm,
them for answers. Come to scientists for questions and
mm,
exploration and data and dig in and learn. And it's an educational and exploratory role for yourself, which is often useful. And then we flip into coaching mode where we don't pick goals for you, but we iterate towards your goals and try things
mm,
and be in your team. So that's my big take on how to go after it. And relevant to your question, I don't necessarily look for the ADHD or the OCD or the PTSD or the autism, but I always do a physiology assessment and a performance assessment with everyone. And I teach them to look at themselves using these tools. And you see again and again and again the same phenomena that will drive OCD or drive autism or drive ADHD. So I mentioned the posterior cingulate a minute ago. It's a very threat sensitive. That one really drives more like PTSD if it's caught in high gear. But the front midline is the anterior cingulates. The cingulates are these midline structures, and they're really about switching your focus around. And broadly, the front of the brain is about the inside self. The back of the brain is about the outside world. Cingulates are switching those environments. So the front midline, I call the CEO, who walks around telling you what to think about. Hey, do this, focus on this. We care about this. And the back midline is that lifeguard going, watch the road, heads up, everyone's safe,
mm,
okay. And they coordinate. But the one in the back tends to ramp up and we ruminate or get stuck in worries because we're evaluating. And the one in the front ramps up and we start getting stuck in our head and perseverating. So you can
mm,
have full blown intrusive thought OCD with high beta in the front midline. If you have tons of theta, which is like a lubrication, a release frequency, then you tend to have things like songs stuck in your head all day, or you bite your nails aggressively. It's not intrusive thoughts with complex stuff like germs and high level concepts. It's more like a stuck little tick. It's a behavior where you're twitching or ticking or chewing. And so you'll see a little face tick, or you'll see some biting their nails, or have like a really intrusive radio station playing the same song all day. If there's theta on the front midline because it's disinhibited, and you'll see more classic OCD, hand washing and other, classic complex behavior, intrusive thoughts with beta waves in the front midline. And then if you have beta behind the right, there's this cluster of tissue behind the right ear called the tempoparietal junction, and it brings the world into the self. The sensory and the social world gets mapped into the default mode network right there. And I call this area the princess and the pea because it's often like, too much, too sensitive. And this area ramps up in anxiety features. So if you have the front midline and behind the right ear, hot, yoked up and reacting like a muscle that wants to spasm, then you have an environmentally driven obsessive anxiety. And there's three flavors that show up, including something called misophonia, where wives kill their husbands for chewing too loud because it's so enraging. And people get mad at small sounds. It's that little like can't filter that background thing, and you're obsessively focused on it, and it's occupying your mind. The bucket called nails on chalkboard is huge, and lots of things fit into it. And you also get, oddly enough, both claustrophobia and agoraphobia from those co-activations of that front midline and behind the right ear, because the environment is stressful and you're sort of hyper focused and obsessive, and it's got this uncomfortable self versus environment kind of mapping going on. And that area behind the right ear is involved with understanding tone of voice and recognizing face expression and recognizing faces to some extent. So you see that area kind of cramped up in people that suffer from autistic spectrum features, the social component of it, the eye contact, the social cueing, the verbal prosody. If somebody is talking like this all the time because they have high functioning autism and they can't get the lilt going, that area is not monitoring their lilt of speech or yours. So they miss your sarcasm and they sound kind of sing-song because they're not noticing it necessarily the
mm,
same way. So if that area is hot, just to back up on brain mapping for a second, it's not diagnostically valid. People are weird. Good job. Be weird. Like when you look at a population compared brain map, all you know is what is different, not what is good or bad. And then
mm,
you want to do a physiology exploration, say, look, behind your right ear, kind of hot with beta, no social issues, but you might have your empathy might be turned up to, oh yeah, kind of raw. Okay, that's what it is. Not lack of social, but a bit of a raw, extra in some ways social. So you can have the front midline and back midline and behind the right ear really cramped up hard in folks that are profoundly autistic, with a lot of anxiety, obsessiveness, sensory and social issues. Same circuits cramped up in brilliant, anxious CEOs and gifted poets without any social cueing issue, and a rich internal environment that might be a little bit too rich, that sort of hurts poets a little too much to, experience the world stuff. That, those same circuits might present, and you wouldn't know looking at data if somebody hews more towards spectrum, social impairment stuff, or towards gifted and anxious, plenty of resources with which to catastrophize and get obsessed and get stuck and maybe a tick or two. But you would know something was up, and you could say, hey, look, your brain a little strange in this way. Here's a plausible idea. What do you think? Is this important? Oh, that's important to you. You care about that. That seems valid. Okay. Well, we don't know if we've gotten a handle on it for sure because brains are weird, but we have agency. You can now gently stretch that front midline, stick a wire there, measure the alpha moment to moment, measure the theta and beta moment to moment. When the alpha surges and the other ones relax for a second, applaud it. A couple days of that, if it's relevant to OCD or your tics, they're going to be reduced. So neurofeedback is mysterious, but not blind, because you're kind of going, push on, how'd that feel? Huh, okay, cool. And it also wears off initially. So you have this freedom to gently push yourself, feel a resource shift, do it again, feel it again, and really validate the experiences. And you can tune the protocols. So you might be like training for executive function or ADHD stuff, and train down the theta and the alpha on the strip of tissue that runs ear to ear. On the right-hand side, there's the principal, and he walks around going, are you sure you want to do that? No, I didn't think so. There you go. Have fun. Oh, you sure you want to do that? No, I didn't think so. All right, good job behaving. That's the right-hand side, the supervisor of attention, right in the middle cortex. And left-hand side is a spotlight that keeps the mode you're in stable. So it keeps you focusing on boring stuff if you think you should. It also keeps you asleep at night. So you tend to get, with ADD, inattentiveness, a sleep maintenance issue. And ADHD, squirrel, lack of supervisor, difficulty falling asleep, because those are also based on sleep regulation tissues. So you can walk through these resources with people and start to reframe it from, oh yeah, you have ADHD, into, oh, hey, is this impulsivity thing we're seeing in your brain valid? Oh, we measured it in your performance, seems real. You want to work on that? And we teach people about these resources and how to change them, not just with neurofeedback, also with other forms of biohacking, mindfulness, supplements, sleep hacks, metabolic biohacking, which includes things like circadian timing and monkeying about with macronutrients. There's a bunch of stuff you may want to do. I don't tend to have hard and fast rules across the board for any particular biohack, because everything is goal focused. Just like I'm not treating a diagnosis, but I'm working on the resources that might be bottlenecking that give you that diagnosis, or somebody's, assumed it. But I like to reframe it as the actual physiology. And then by doing that, people suddenly have a different relationship with their brain. Their front midline OCD is powerful. It's a steel trap mind that gets kind of stuck sometimes. Wouldn't you prefer to have another gear accessible? But this is not a problem. It's not a disease. It's a cramped up muscle because it's so powerful, it's spasmed. And an awful lot of what you can see in the cortex at these regulatory level is of that nature. It's of that like cramped up resource. It's not a broken thing or disease thing generally. So you can do an awful lot of tuning for these big human suffering areas. So
I find it interesting. I mean, then another term I kind of liken it to your brain training. That neurofeedback is brain training. I used to use a Muse. I don't know if you come across the Muse at all, but yeah, I used to use the Muse device. So for people that are listening, I would meditate with this device on, and then every time that I was getting into a theta brainwave state, then I would hear the little bird. So it would kind of gamify me trying to hear the birds more often, so I was getting a better form of meditation, and I used to love that until it broke, so then I stopped using it and never replaced it. But yeah, it was a really, really useful exercise, and being able to go through that. So if people, because this can be used in a multitude of different ways, so utilizing neurofeedback, I mean, everything from optimizing stress, sleep, attention, brain fog, creativity, even your athletic performance.
Yeah.
What are you finding that people are getting the best results from? I mean, when they start doing this, is it normally they're coming from a place of optimization with you, or they're trying to move away from a pain, or both?
Great question. I would say the field of neurofeedback is mostly about suffering in sort of therapy and treatment perspective. At Peak Brain, we're about a third peak performers and high level athletes, executives, sports teams, really working on human optimization things. And, someone comes in for optimization and peak performance, they generally do have some things to work on that are also in the suffering category. But when a CEO comes in, it's usually because he wants to squeeze the juice out of life more, or an athlete wants to recover from their workouts faster. Um, every so often, I get athletes. I'm working with a couple of guys right now from the NFL. Well, one from the NHL, one from the NFL. Both of whom were out
What
of
team
play.
in the NHL? I played ice hockey for 23 years. As soon as you mentioned
So yeah, a
NHL,
guy named
my
Connor
team.
Carrick. Guy named
Right.
Connor
Okay.
Carrick. I think I don't know who he's playing for right now. He's getting shuffled around.
Yeah.
But he got out of play because of an injury, and we've been working his brain back, and he's back
Concussion
to play.
or
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And a couple of football players as well have had this experience where they're out of play and they're young and they're like, I'm not done yet. What can I do? And neurofeedback can rebuild your brain pretty well from concussions over time. It takes a little bit longer than like ADHD. I mean, ADHD or even trauma, like anxiety things that are acute, classic PTSD and things take about 3 to 4 months for most people, maybe up to 6 if you have lots of stuff going on, lots of complicated things. But things like injuries or developmental, being atypical, like autism, those often take 4 to 6 months just as a baseline because there's more to do and there's more change that you're trying to pursue, basically. But I would say that it almost doesn't matter if you're a kid coming in or an adult with ADHD and a lot of difficulties, or someone who's drinking too much, or a high level performer squeezing the juice out of life, getting paid millions to do it. Doesn't really matter. When you look at the brain, you see the resources, and anxiety, attention, and sleep are the big 3 legs of the stool that keep us all. Those are the overlapping resources. So I mentioned regulatory, and there's a half a dozen that you alluded to as well, that are things that are meant to change in some ways, meant to tune your immune system, your focus, your anxiety. But the sleep, stress, and attention, those 3 are special and actually overlap each other in their regulation. So sleep and attention have a co-regulation, they have a resource they share, and attention and anxiety and sleep all have a piece of overlap if you dig into the brain one level below the concept of those things. And so they really operate like this intertwined, 3 points of balance for your resources. So if you have a sleep issue, onset, depth, maintenance, whatever, and you address it, it affects everything. If you have an executive function issue, you can't stay focused or you can't stay on task, and you address it, it affects everything in your life, or a stress response. And so you also mentioned the idea that stress and threat, has this sort of body-based component, and it totally does. But the cingulates, especially in the default mode network, they're really tied into the vagus system. So the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, about a dozen nerves leave the brain directly and don't go down the spine. They come out, sort of wrap around the front of the body mostly, and down the front. The biggest trunk of that is called the vagus, the wanderer, I think in Latin perhaps. And the vagus is a bundle of tissue. It's a more than one nerve. It's a whole bundle, whole ribbon that travels down the front of the body and up the front of the body. And it brings up the ascending information from the gut, from the heart, up into the brain. And it brings the descending information from the brain down into the heart and the gut. And so my joke is to my neuroscience students, what happens in the vagus doesn't stay in the vagus. Although, we may have to change the joke for my British listeners. The idea is that the vagus, the heart rate, is integrating. So the beat to beat timing of the heart is strongly affected by the vagus. So you can do things with your body that are appropriate at the level of activation. When you stand up, your heartbeat gets a bit rigid and brittle for a minute, tight, so it can push blood to all the extremities in your brain when you stand up, and you don't want to pass out just from standing up. But by the same token, it then relaxes because you don't need to run away from a tiger right now. You can tone or tune the heart's timing to the momentary need to integrate that ascending information from the gut and that descending information of appraisal from the brain. And that will keep your heart sort of beating softly or appropriately flexibly, beat to beat to beat. And when that drops, when the vagus tone is not maintained by the heart and brain, gut and brain meeting in the heart, then the heartbeat gets brittle and anxiety starts to climb. So you get these cingulate activations and you get low heart rate variability as the same phenomena. And then you often get sleep maintenance issues where you wake up throughout the night as the same phenomena. And you get generalized high frequency, high coupling beta throughout the head, which is a general anxiety state, or you get hypervigilance. When the eyes are closed, you can see the visual tissue staying lit up just in case. You might have to scan the world. So any or all of these could show up for any one person. And, most of it makes sense. And as you walk through brain mapping and performance testing, the fun part is the stuff that makes sense is the right stuff. You know what's true about you. You know how you feel. You know if you're distractible or anxious or not sleeping great, at least kind of know it. And when you point it out in data, you're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh wow, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's effective. Oh, okay, yeah, I am not sleeping great. Okay, yep, that makes sense. That's why I can't find words. Huh. And you start to give people a different relationship with what's going on. So
that's very, very interesting. I mean, you mentioned about low heart rate variability. So I think I'm fairly in tune. I don't drink alcohol. I sleep 8 hours a night. I wear my Whoop. I track my sleep. There's certain things but I know I've got terrible heart rate variability. I'm fit. I'm definitely not the fittest I've ever been, but I'm fit. I mean, I can go and run a 10K now and not bat an eyelid, that kind of thing. But my heart rate variability is that of like a 70-year-old man. I'm 34 years old, right? Now, people have said to me, well, what's the underlying? I meditate pretty much every day. So there's things going on there, but it's really interesting you saying that actually because I would argue that I am kind of in my parasympathetic nervous system, so my rest and digest. So because people have said that would be a reason why you would have low heart rate variability. But what you're saying there is that actually if they're not necessarily connected and it's something to do with that, the vagus nerve and the impact of information there, then that may be one of the factors of something else that's underlying.
It may not just be the vagus, but let me back up for a second. What's low in HRV? I work with Olympic athletes that are the peak pinnacles of human performance. And some of them have HRV resting that's in the hundreds, and some have HRV that is like 30. Yeah. And it does not track. The absolute number of HRV is not a meaningful statistic. The change for you within your range is meaningful. So if you get sick, it'll dip. If you rest well, it'll go up a few points, percentage points for you. But if you're got a 30 or something and you're a young person without cardiovascular disease, without high blood pressure, without a lot of anxiety, you're sleeping well and getting rest from sleep, then your HRV that's numerically low is actually just fine for you. And what a sleep tracker picks up, Whoop or Aura, I was wearing them all for a while and talking to all the CEOs of these companies and saying, hey, my clients have different reporting things, and I'm seeing different things on this, arm full of sleep trackers that I'm wearing. Can you please help me understand? We talked a lot about what was going on. And the thing that HRV, the sleep trackers telling you what HRV is not the same HRV we're talking about walking around reacting to stress. The assessed HRV when you're awake is not the same as the peak HRV when you're asleep, is not the same as the HRV training you do with a heart math device and with biofeedback. They're all different HRVs. It's not a reserved word, and they all calculate it a little bit differently. And they're talking about a slightly different phenomena. So as long as you're not experiencing disproportionate stress, just look at the HRV and try to do things that don't tank it, and maybe, bring the baseline up when you need to.
It's so funny. So are you familiar with WAVI or Wavy?
Sure.
Yeah. So for people that listen to this, so I got connected. It was actually on the back of somebody else I interviewed on my podcast, Chris Reynolds, and I then found somebody that was doing it in the UK, and I went and had the testing, and it gave me a whole idea for a business which I never went through. But I ended up having my performance assessments, and I've just pulled it up because I was going to ask you if you knew about it.
Sure.
And I remember that there was a score that she looked at, and she's obviously done thousands of these things, and she said at the time, there was this particular score. She said, I don't think I've ever seen anybody with it as high as what you've got it, but in a positive way. And I've
Yeah.
just gone to see what that was. Now,
Probably your
ironic,
P300. Yeah. Probably your
well,
ERP for attention was high.
it was actually, funnily enough, me just looking at, it was my heart rate variability system balance,
Oh,
my tracking heart rate variability score on that. I haven't looked at this for like 2 years since I've just
I
opened it
didn't
up.
know they picked up HRV. It's interesting. Cool.
Yeah, she's given me a yeah, I thought that was really quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, as a tool was quite interesting just looking at this here. But
That's great. That's cool. Yeah, the Wabi sort of does a 4-minute QEEG with an evoked potential. It's meant to be used by non-skilled people for the brain. So it's a very quick assessment that a chiropractor can do and redo and redo and redo when someone has a concussion or they're aging or something. It doesn't give you the same information that a full brain map would do, a 20-minute recording, a deep analysis, but it's the same kind of tech. It's giving you EEG, and it's cool. I didn't realize they're picking up HRV, but all EEG people kind of hate heartbeat because it contaminates EEG. It moves the scalp. You can see it everywhere. So they're going to be measuring and filtering out the heartbeat. So that's kind of cool that they've added an HRV calculation off of that. It's a very elegant way to handle the noise.
So that's what I was going to go into, because obviously a lot of people listening to this right now, they know, well, this is all interesting. Well, this sounds fascinating, but Andrew's over in the States. We probably haven't got something like this over in the UK. What do we do? But I'm running saying that now this is something that the Peak Brain Institute has the ability to do remotely as well.
We do. We actually work pretty worldwide. I will say we have Peak Brain Ltd in His Majesty's business, whatever you guys call it. We have a Peak Brain UK company with a local London person, and we also have a sport-focused branch in London as well. So you guys have two of our really prestige branches in the UK itself. But if you're not in the UK or Sweden or the US, which is where our physical offices are, you can still work with us. And most of our clients, even in the US, don't come to our offices. We have a half a dozen locations, and in the US, we sort of cover the middle of the country, the west of the country, and the East Coast. So you can come to LA or New York or St. Louis. But if you're not near one of those locations and you still want to work with us, we just send you equipment. And you can rent equipment if you're in one of our countries, or can pick it up in our countries, or you can purchase equipment otherwise. And we run these multi-month coaching programs where we assess your brain, build neurofeedback, and iterate with you, teach you how to do it over a few weeks, and then chat with you throughout the week, get sleep reports, day reports, talk to you about how you're feeling, about your different goals, and start giving you new neurofeedback protocols and other biohacking to layer in to change, and then reassess you and sort of be a skilled, a mix between your gym, your mechanic, your scientist, your lab, kind of everything except your doctor. You get access to the tools your psychologist or psychiatrist might use, or neuropsychiatrist, but they're not the expert. You're becoming your own expert is our goal. So we have this 1-2 kind of service offering where you can do brain mapping, and you can also do brain training, and all the brain training programs include brain mapping, essentially, because that's part of the assessment. But yeah, people can work with us remotely. We have this 7-day-a-week worldwide coaching team who will hang out and bug you to fill out your sleep surveys if you haven't, and we'll help you place a wire in your head if you need, or kick your Windows machine because it decided to update right then, because that happens. But yeah, so we try to get the technology out of the way, and you can work with us really wherever you are, but it becomes a little bit less expensive if you're in the UK or the US or Sweden, because we can just ship you rental systems and work with you pretty quickly there too. So
really interesting. And if people want to find out about that, where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, so check us out at peakbraininstitute.com, or in the UK, peakbrain.co.uk is our local office for direct people there if they want to talk to Chris in London. So we're all over the web though at Peak Brain. I have an old podcast that's dropping new episodes shortly, the Head First with Dr. Hill podcast. You can find that on all the podcast places. But yeah, come check us out at Peak Brain Institute. We'll put in the show notes a coupon for folks to cut the brain mapping membership in half. So it's usually $500 in the US, and it's $250 for unlimited mapping in our US offices. And I think it ends up being about £300 for a pre-post brain map under this deal in the UK. So you can use it as a biohacker special and examine your nootropics or your fatigue, or see how you're recovering from your concussion if you wish, by just working with Chris a little bit for some data. So
sounds good. And then we can put that in and we'll put the code in the show notes. Then people can go and take advantage of that. Just one final question before we leave. there's certain people in the world that are pressing forward. Obviously, this last year, since November last year, with AI and ChatGPT and all those things that are developing forward. Then you've got people like Elon that are doing stuff with Neuralink. How do you see technologies like Neuralink and equivalents
Yeah.
having an impact on us as somebody that's kind of
Yeah.
in this world? How do you see that rolling out over the next 5 years or so?
Yeah. Neuralink's not going to affect us. It's nonsense. It's a bad company. They're doing bad things. They're getting in trouble left and right for how they're doing research, for how they're doing animal research, and human research is not going to be any different. They haven't solved anything. They're all like, oh, we're cutting holes in heads, but they've solved the robotic surgery. That's what Neuralink is. It's a robotic surgery to make it more reliable. They haven't solved the problem of brain-computer interface. Getting wires into the head is not really the problem. Yes, it's a giant hassle, but it's not really the problem. The problem is, what do you do when the brain changes what's underneath the wires, which happens? So it's a lot more complicated than just sticking wires in heads. And I do not think that of all the things Elon Musk is doing, that's the least real, as far as I can tell, and the most sci-fi and the most waste of money. And it sort of okay, he's a mad scientist. Sort of fits that he's trying to experiment on humans. Okay, but I think that's the most vaporware thing he's putting out there. And the people for whom it's not vaporware are those folks who are locked in with paralysis, who need BCI. And this is going to advance that landscape, the folks that want surgical interventions. But we can measure the EEG without cutting into your head pretty well at this point. You put 64 wires or a full head cap on, and you can get precision of EEG that is equivalent to fMRI in the brain, 1 millimeter precision, pretty close. So I don't think BCI is the solution. The Neuralink stuff is really that exciting. I think AI is fairly exciting because we're going to get, I'm all about bringing expertise to the individual, and this is going to accelerate that. You'll be able to, just like coders now will have AI co-pilots and code-based assistants who will learn the code base of their project and start helping them build better code. I think we're going to have AI agents who will learn our medical history and our genes and the literature landscape that is proliferating aggressively in medicine. And we'll start to surface individualized recommendations. We'll start to test drugs on us in simulation. We'll start to do that kind of thing where we have essentially avatar style health representations that can be a reflection of our health status or our wellness or performance status, and will let us essentially, like computers become, or phones become reflections of our knowledge base. I think we're gonna have the same thing in our health and wellness landscape. I mean, think about, 50 years ago, we didn't check triglycerides, maybe 80 years ago, didn't check triglycerides. Now you look at triglycerides and go, oh crap, back off on the ice cream, and you learn. Or you can look at your brain and learn how this, the singulates work and control your OCD, or learn that your alpha speed is slow and your word finding is tanked from that, and address it. And I think that the number of places we're demystifying physiology, the way that we're figuring out individualized medicine and individualized health stuff, AI is going to accelerate that. And I believe within 5 years, we will be doing a really good job of translational medicine and compression of morbidity, meaning really good job at taking things that have just been discovered in supplements or meds and getting them into people who need them, because we're going to be able to compress the testing and discovery phase a lot for some of this stuff through AI. I also think that we're going to get the ability to take a lot of stuff we don't need to be dying from or sick from or suffering from and compress it into the last bit of life. So illness doesn't have to be, dying is about death, not so much about dying for 30 years. Flatten that trajectory, improving that trajectory. My grandparents were way more frail than my parents, with bone density, with muscles, with their diet. My parents are like ridiculously powerful in their mid 70s compared to their parents in their mid 70s. And that's not really about the genes or better food in the 50s for them versus the 30s. It's something different. It's about the fact that they know how to do, the more advanced medicine in the past 20 years, and that's kept them healthier. It's kept that trajectory flatter. And that's really, I think, a goal that we're going to start really being able to exploit and some benefit from, where our speed of processing, I think we're discovering more things about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's There's been, not that I care too much, but there's been a big discovery on what's going on with gray and bald hair recently. So it looks like a few years from now, baldness might be a thing of the past, oddly. But so maybe other things where you end up getting deeply personalized attention from intelligent avatars, and you have doctors steering, training, double checking them, and not, how hard is it to get in front of a doctor? I see doctors and it's 15, 20 minutes, doctors talking full speed at me the whole time, and I can't see them again for 2 months or 3 months. And when I work with people, they start the conversation, trying to get all the information in because they're like afraid that they're not going to have much time to interact. And then we start working with them every single day, and it's real-time access, and they're, oh, okay, this is like a gym. I have coaches and I can, get some support. I think that's going to be what happens, is we're going to not have to silo the expertise of really sophisticated science and medicine into the doctors, quite as much. 50, 60, 70 years ago, doctors were like gods. They said something, you did it, including bad stuff in this country, certainly. Many countries in the 40s and 50s were doing very bad things with our people that had problems. And I think that the democratization, the access, the agency that is being brought by AI is actually the super exciting part. So.
Cool. Lovely. Thank you very much. Very interesting answer. Well, Dr. Andrew Hill, thank you so much for coming on and being a guest on the show. For everybody that's been listening, we will pop the link to the websites below so you can access them, and also the very kind discount code so that you can get access to that as well. So, Andrew, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Will. Nice to be here.
And for everybody that's been listening, until next time, make it happen. Thank you for listening to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with anybody that you think could benefit from it, and also make sure that you hit subscribe so that you get the new episodes as soon as they're released.